The water off the Farallon Islands near San Francisco turns a particular shade of gray in late fall, and it was in that water, in 1997, that whale watchers saw the encounter that would eventually reach places far beyond the Pacific. A great white shark moved through the cold current, and then an orca came up beneath it. The strike was not a prolonged wrestle between equals. The orca hit the great white, stunned it, and flipped it over. What happened next lasted about 15 minutes. An accident happens before the whale began to feed on it, and the shark hung there, a white form upside down in the gray light. You have probably wondered which one would win. So have scientists for decades, but what the watchers saw that day did not look like a battle at all. It looked like a deliberate, quiet piece of work, and nowhere near the usual image of two apex predators colliding. The water closed and opened again, and the orca held its position, patient, unhurried. That moment on the Farallon Islands in 1997 became one of the first clear witnesses to something that science had only suspected. A great white shark, the most recognizable hunter in the ocean, was not fighting back, and it was not winning. The orca had terminated the contest before it could become one, and the shark, suspended and still, was held there for close to a quarter of an hour before the orca began to feed. What really happens when an orca targets a great white, it turns out, is not what the word competition suggests. It is not a clash of equals on equal terms. The record that has built up since that day, including a formal study published in 2023, points to a different story, one of precision, evasion, and a very specific outcome. The answer is not a fight. To understand this, it helps to first see the great white as it usually is, a quieter hunter than its reputation suggests, built from millions of years of refinement. It moves through the water with almost no disturbance, a body shaped to slide rather than push, powered by muscle and a steady current of oxygen. Its skin is rough as sandpaper. Its senses are extraordinary, and the electrical fields of other animals are read through the ampullae of Lorenzini, tiny channels in its snout that feel the heartbeat of anything below. The great white is large enough to have very few natural threats, and most of its life is spent in a kind of patient roaming, following temperature, scent, and the movements of prey. It does not hunt all the time. Much of its day is drift and observation, a pattern that makes it easier to forget how capable it is when that drifts into focus. But capability is not the same as absence of danger. The orca is a different kind of animal entirely. It is a dolphin, the largest of them, and it carries a brain built for family life, memory, and coordination. An orca weighs more than a great white, often much more, and it moves with a kind of practiced economy that comes from hunting together. It does not rely on stealth alone. It relies on knowledge, on passing what it learns to the next generation, along the same way a human family passes down recipes. What happens when these two meet is not decided by size alone, and it is not decided by speed. It is decided by information. The orca appears to know the great white's weaknesses, the way the great white knows the weaknesses of a seal. That is the quiet truth that the Farallon sighting in 1997 announced, and it is what the 2023 study off the South African coast confirmed with direct observation. No inference from carcasses, no guesswork. In 2023, researchers published a paper in Marine Ecology Progress Series with a title that states plainly what they saw. They called it Direct Observation of Killer Whales Preying on White Sharks. The words matter. For a long time, much of the evidence that orcas hunt great whites was indirect. A recovered carcass here, a set of scars there, a pattern of migration data that suggested avoidance. But this study watched it happen. The scientists documented killer whales closely and slowly following white sharks, and the sharks did something that tells you a great deal about their intelligence. They did not flee in a straight line. They took evasive action, tightly circling the killer whales while keeping them in sight. It is a behavior that reads almost like a defensive maneuver, a way to stay aware of the threat without turning their backs on it. The white shark's circling response is one of those details that rewires how you picture the whole encounter. The great white is not a simple opponent.
It is measuring, tracking, and responding to something it clearly recognizes as dangerous. The researchers saw the sharks keep the orcas in view turning and turning, and that image of a large predator checking its flank is one of the more patient images of predation you will see. And the study did not stop at the behavior. The observed attacks were associated with the removal of the shark's livers, an organ that in a large great white is enormous and rich in oil. The researchers described this as specialized predation on a high-energy organ. The orca was not eating for survival in the way we sometimes imagine. It was selecting, extracting, and consuming a specific part of the animal. That finding is the key that unlocks the whole story. The liver of a great white is not like a liver in a familiar land animal. It is a massive, oil-filled structure that can make up a large part of the shark's body weight and buoyancy. For an orca, it is a calorie-dense prize, worth more than the rest of the shark combined. And the language the scientists used, specialized predation, points to a behavior refined over time. The BBC, covering the events in 2023, reported that scientists said the orcas exhibited a predilection for extracting and consuming the shark's livers. That phrase, a predilection, carries the weight of repetition. This was not a one-off piece of opportunism. It was a taste, a method, a pattern. One attack, filmed in 2023, was described as solo and swift. A lone killer whale killed a great white shark in an attack that lasted under 2 minutes. The shark was 2.5 meters long, not a full-grown adult, but by no means small. And it was over quickly. Not the long wrestling match of imagination, but a short, targeted event. To sit inside that timeline for a moment, 2 minutes is almost nothing at sea. A great white can cover a great deal of water in 2 minutes. A pod of orcas can travel a kilometer or more, but this attack was done before the camera could capture more than the beginning. The orca did not tire the shark out. It dispatched it, and then it fed. Under 2 minutes, the speed of the 2023 attack is one of the most striking details in the entire record. If you picture a fight between two large predators, you picture duration, effort, and resistance. The documented reality is the opposite, and that contrast between expectation and evidence is exactly where the fascination lives. That gap between what we expect and what the evidence shows is where the story is. Subscribe to keep walking into that gap with us, because there is always another hidden partnership waiting. If the 2-minute kills surprised you, drop a single word in the comments, whatever it made you feel. The 1997 Farallon event now seems even more remarkable in hindsight. That orca did not kill the shark in under 2 minutes. It held it upside down for about 15 minutes before feeding. That dorsal ventral hold, the white belly of a great white exposed to the sky, has become an image that scientists return to again and again when they talk about this relationship. 15 minutes is a long time to hold still. For the shark, it must have been a kind of immobilization that removed even the possibility of resistance. For the watchers on the boat, it must have been surreal. The most fearsome fish in the sea, hanging inverted like a toy. There is a term in animal behavior that some have reached for when they describe this curious position. A state sometimes called tonic immobility, in which a shark can appear to go quiet and passive. It is a real phenomenon, but it is also easy to overstate. No one can say with certainty what the shark experiences during those 15 minutes, and it would be dishonest to claim otherwise. What the record shows is the hold, the stillness, and the feeding that followed. The silence of that hold, the blank gray water around it, is one of those details that stays with you long after you close the article about it. The Guardian, which reported the 1997 sighting, described the shark being held in a ventral position for approximately 15 minutes before feeding began. That is the spine of the event, the fact that everything else hangs on. Part of what makes this hard to absorb is the myth of the great white as an unstoppable machine. It is an apex predator in every literal sense of the word, with no natural enemies in most of its range. But the orca is the exception, and the word that gets used over and over in the scientific literature is specialized. This is not random aggression. The great white carries that reputation without asking for it. It is large, powerful, and silent.
But when an orca arrives, the evidence from 2023 shows a very different set of responses. Evasive action, tight circling, keeping the orca in view. That behavior reads like recognition, not panic. The shark knows what it is facing. There is a moment in every animal encounter where each participant reveals what it knows. The great white reveals that it knows the orca is dangerous. The orca reveals that it knows the great white has a liver worth taking. Neither animal is acting in ignorance, and that mutual knowing is what makes the interaction so quiet and so complete. Now, the question that presses itself forward is the one about the liver. Why does the orca leave the rest of the shark untouched? Why 15 minutes of holding and then a feeding that selects only one part? The answer seems to lie in the mathematics of energy, but something about it also feels almost cultural, a preference that has been passed down within a group. The 2023 study does not use the word culture, it uses the evidence. The attacks were associated with the removal of the shark's livers, and that indicates specialized predation on a high-energy organ. The language is careful, and the conclusion is firm. The orcas are not eating the whole shark. They are eating the part that matters, which means the great white in these encounters is not killed for food in the way we usually understand it. It is killed for a single specific resource, and the rest of the body is left to sink slowly back into the deep. That is a hard fact to absorb. It strips the fight of any heroic quality and replaces it with something more surgical, more efficient, and somehow more unsettling. The two documented events in the 2023 study, two white sharks preyed upon by killer whales in the observed set, are a small sample, but they are direct. They are not inference. They are what the researchers watched happen off the South African coast, and they line up with the pattern that was first witnessed off the Farallon Islands in 1997. Geography matters here. The Farallon Islands sit near San Francisco in the Eastern Pacific. South Africa is the other side of the planet, a completely different ocean, a different population of great whites, and still the same behavior appears. The orca targets the great white, and the great white tries to keep it in sight, and the liver is what gets taken. That geographic spread tells you this is not a local quirk. It is a pattern that has developed independently or been carried across oceans, and the consistency of it is one of the reasons the 2023 paper was able to state its finding with such confidence. If you are watching the camera angles shift now wide shot of open water, then a medium view of the circling shark, then an extreme close-up of the disturbed surface, you're also watching the levels of evidence. The wide shot is the open question. The medium shot is the behavior. The close-up is the detail that answers it. The great white's best defense, it turns out, is not to become a great white and win a fight. It is to keep the orca in sight and leave. That evasive behavior, documented in 2023, is a survival strategy, and it has probably saved more sharks than any counterattack ever could. Some writers have compared the encounter to a kind of chess, which is a fair enough image, as long as you remember that the loser does not get to reset the board. The orca makes a move. The great white reads it, adjusts, and either escapes or does not. The species that remembers how to leave is the one that survives. What we are really describing is not a grudge match between two famous animals. It is an ecological relationship, one that shapes how great whites move, where they hunt, and how they behave when a familiar dark shape appears in the distance. And that shaping is exactly what scientists are still working to understand. Behind the Farallon sighting and the 2023 study is a long history of people trying to make sense of the scraps they found before they could watch the full event. A shark washed up with its liver missing, a carcass with teeth marks that did not match any other predator. These were the clues that led to the direct observation, and they quietly correct the myth that there was no evidence at all. The direct evidence exists. It is on film, it is in the peer-reviewed literature, and it is titled plainly, Direct Observation of Killer Whales Preying on White Sharks. The confidence of that title is earned, and it sits at the center of everything being described here. Now to slow down for a moment and let the weight of it settle. The great white shark is not the undisputed ruler of its own ocean. There is a larger, smarter, more structured hunter that knows exactly how to handle it. And the great white knows that too. That is the quiet truth, and it is not a small one. The reason the attack in 2023 was over in under 2 minutes is not because the shark was weak. It is because the orca did not need more time. The strike was efficient enough to end the encounter before it became a struggle, and that is what specialized predation looks like when it is working. Step back from the individual event into the pattern, and you see something almost architectural. The orca has learned that the great white's liver is the prize, that the upside-down hold can reduce the shark to stillness, and that the whole process can be completed quickly. The great white has learned that the only escape is evasion. Both animals are behaving according to knowledge passed down within their own kinds. The orca inherits a method. The great white inherits a caution, and the ocean, in the middle of it, simply keeps its own time. When the BBC reported on the 2023 events, the phrase that stood out was "solo and swift." A lone killer whale, an attack completed in under 2 minutes, no assistance from a pod. That the behavior works, solo, tells you how practiced it is. This is not improvisation. It is a repeatable technique. The shark in that filmed attack was 2.5 meters long. That is a serious animal, a predator in its own right, capable of taking seals and other large prey. And it was dispatched by a single orca before the camera could record more than the beginning of the encounter. The disparity is not in size. It is in method. There is a temptation to describe this as a battle, to dress it up with the language of combat. But the evidence resists that. The orca is not fighting, it is working. And the great white in the observed cases is not fighting either. It is trying to escape, keeping the killer whale in sight, circling and leaving when it can. When a pattern appears in 1997 and again in 2023, it stops being an accident. It becomes knowledge moving through the water, and watching that movement is the reason this place exists. If you want to stay with that kind of observation, subscribe. Leave the word method in the comments, if that is what you see now. Not a battle, but something quieter. What happened when the orca targeted the great white in 1997 was not so different from what happened in 2023, decades later, and an ocean away.
The details matched the upside-down position in 1997. The narrow time frame is not documented the same way in the older event, but the outcome was the same. The orca fed on the liver, and the shark was gone. The word gone is the measured way to say it.
The water closed over the place where the white shape had been. There is no screaming in the sea, no dramatic end seen from the boat. There is only a stillness that returns, and the orca turning away. Part of what makes this encounter feel different from other predator and prey stories is the intelligence on both sides. The great white responds with a defensive maneuver developed over time. The orca responds with a preference, a predilection, as the scientists called it, for a specific organ. Neither animal is on autopilot. If you have ever felt the instinct to keep watching something dangerous, to keep it in your field of view rather than turn and run, you have a faint sense of what the great white does when an orca appears. It is a universal response, the feeling of being watched and the urge to watch back. The shark does not flee blindly. It circles, tracks, and waits for the moment to leave. That is one of the rare places in this story where a human experience and a shark response feel close to each other. We are not so unlike the great white in that moment, holding our ground with our eyes while our body prepares to move. And the recognition of that shared instinct is exactly what makes the 2023 observations stick in the mind. And yet there's a difference between the shark's vigilance and our own. The great white does not have the luxury of narrative. It does not tell itself a story about what it fears. It simply reads the water, feels the vibration of the orca's movement through the lateral line that runs along its flank, and responds. The response is not thought in the human sense. It is older than thought, a reflex polished by millions of years of near misses. The orca, by contrast, appears to operate with something closer to intention. The 2023 study emphasizes that the killer whales closely and slowly followed the white sharks. That word slowly is worth sitting with. A predator in a hurry is a predator that is uncertain. A predator that moves slowly is a predator that already knows the outcome. The orca was not hunting, it was collecting. What the researchers describe as a kind of patience that looks almost like boredom if you do not know what is about to happen. The killer whale follows. The shark circles, and the water between them holds a tension that neither animal seems willing to break first. Then the orca moves, and the encounter is over before the shark can complete another turn. It is worth asking what the great white perceives in that moment. Its senses are extraordinary. The ampullae of Lorenzini can detect the faint electrical field of a heartbeat through sand and water. Its eyes are adapted to low light. Its lateral line feels pressure, changes from far away. The shark likely knows the orca is there long before the orca acts, and it knows what the orca is capable of. That knowing is what makes the circling behavior so remarkable. The great white does not scatter. It does not race away in a straight line, which would expose its flank and its tail. It turns, always keeping the orca in its field of view, a slow defensive rotation that minimizes the danger of a blind spot. It is the posture of an animal that has faced this before, or inherited the memory of those that did. The 2023 paper does not speculate about what the shark feels. It records what the shark does, and what the shark does is discipline. There is no panic in the circling, no wasted motion. The great white is behaving exactly as a predator should when it realizes that a larger predator has entered its territory. This raises a quiet question about reputation. The great white is called an apex predator, and the title is accurate. It sits at the top of most food chains in most of the oceans where it lives. But the orca sits above it, and the evidence for that hierarchy is not a single event, but a repeated pattern that has now been observed on 2 continents. The word apex is a useful simplification, but it flattens the real shape of the ocean. There is no single summit. There are niches, layers, and relationships that shift with context. A great white is apex in open water, avoiding the coast. An orca is apex everywhere it goes, and it carries that status with the quiet confidence of an animal that has never had to prove it. What is striking is how little the great white's reputation helped it in the documented encounters. The 2023 shark was 2.5 meters long, a solid predator by any measure. It had jaws, teeth, and speed, but the orca did not engage with those weapons. It bypassed the fight entirely, targeting the one vulnerability that the shark could not defend. The liver is not an accident of anatomy. It is a strategic choice. For an orca, a single great white liver can contain more usable energy than many hours of hunting smaller prey. The orca is not being cruel. It is being efficient, and efficiency is its own kind of respect for the prey it takes. If you watch footage of great whites in the presence of orcas, you see a behavioral shift that is almost immediate. The shark's posture changes. Its swimming becomes tighter, more deliberate. It does not approach the way it might approach a seal. It defers, and that deference is not submission. It is the recognition of a threat that cannot be outmatched by strength alone. The 2023 study's phrase, evasive action, is clinical, but it carries the weight of the whole encounter. The great white is not attacking. It is not even threatening. It is trying to leave, and the only way to leave safely is to keep the orca in view. Every turn it makes is a calculation, a read on where the danger is and where it might move next. There is a version of this story that would be told as a triumph of brute force, the orca overpowering the shark through sheer size. But the evidence points elsewhere. The orca wins because it knows something. It knows the liver. It knows the upside-down hold. It knows the timing. And the great white loses because it cannot counter what it cannot predict. The word strategy is usually reserved for humans, but the behavior documented in 2023 has the shape of it. The killer whale does not rush. It does not telegraph its move. It waits, reads the shark's circle, and chooses the moment when the shark's attention is fractionally elsewhere. Then it moves, and the encounter ends. Part of the difficulty in describing this is that our language is built for conflict. We say, fight, battle, predator, prey, and each word drags in assumptions that the evidence does not support. The orca is not engaged in combat, it is engaged in harvest, and the great white is not a warrior. It is a resource, one that happens to be very good at not being harvested. The great white's evasive circling is a survival skill. but it is not a guarantee. In the 2023 study, 2 white sharks were preyed upon in the documented event set. The observation is direct, but the outcome is not one the sharks controlled. They circled, they kept the orcas in view, and still the encounter ended the same way. Evasion is the best defense, but it is not a perfect one. The imbalance between the two animals is not just physical, it is informational. The orca has learned the shark's vulnerability and passed that knowledge on. The great white has learned to avoid, but avoidance is a negative strategy. It can delay the encounter, but it cannot change the fundamental fact that the orca is faster to the outcome. What the great white has lost is not a fight, it has lost an arms race of knowledge. The orca knows more about the great white than the great white knows about the orca. And in the ocean, information is the difference between surviving and being harvested. This is not to diminish the great white. It remains one of the most effective hunters the ocean has ever produced. But effectiveness is always relative to context, and the context of an orca approaching is one where the great white's usual tools do not apply. Teeth do not help against an animal that does not give you time to use them. The 1997 Farallon event and the 2023 South African study are 2 points on a line that stretches across decades and oceans. Between them lies a quieter record of scarred sharks, missing livers, and migration patterns that bend away from orca territory. The direct observations are the clearest evidence, but they are not the only evidence. The pattern was there long before anyone saw it happen. What scientists are still working through is the ecological consequence. When great whites leave an area, the ecosystem reorganizes. Seals and sea lions may become bolder. Other shark species may move in. The absence of an apex predator is not a vacuum. It is a rearrangement, and the ripples of an orca targeting a great white do not stop at the water's surface. The seals and sea lions that share those waters notice the shift long before any scientist logs it. When the great whites withdraw toward deeper currents or different hunting grounds, the pinnipeds that once measured their risk against a familiar shadow begin to relax. Their haul-out sights grow louder. Their pups venture further from the shallows. It is a small change, barely visible from a boat deck, but it is the first thread in a web that has not finished pulling. Consider what a single missing apex predator means for the fish beneath it. The great white, for all its fame, is not a creature of constant violence. It culls the weak and the slow, and in doing so it keeps entire populations of seals, rays, and smaller sharks moving, shifting, adapting. Remove that pressure, and the system does not freeze. It recomposes often in ways that are hard to predict and harder to reverse. This is the quieter half of the story, the part that does not make it into the dramatic accounts of the encounter itself. An orca does not simply kill a great white and swim away. It changes the map. The territory that the shark once ruled becomes a question mark, and every species that lived in the shadow of that rule must find a new answer. Researchers are beginning to trace those answers. Acoustic tags track sharks as they abandon familiar coastlines. Camera traps at seal colonies record longer, calmer stays. The data is still young, but the direction is consistent. Where the orcas hunt, the great whites thin out, and the ocean redraws its own borders. None of this is judgment on the orca. It is not acting out of malice or strategy in the human sense. It is following an appetite refined by its own kind, and the consequence is a rearrangement that no single animal intends. The ocean does not work in intentions. It works in patterns, and the pattern here is one of constant adjustment. That adjustment is what makes the ocean feel alive in a way that a map never can. A map shows static lines, currents, and depths. But the real ocean is a living negotiation, a conversation between species that never stops. The orca and the great white are two voices in that conversation, and their meeting is one sentence in a longer dialogue. The great white's avoidance of orca territory is not cowardice, it is arithmetic. A shark that learns to steer clear of a pod lives to hunt another season. A shark that ignores the lesson does not. Evolution has a way of rewarding the ones that read the water correctly, and the great whites that survive are the ones that carry that wariness in their genes. That word, wariness, might linger longer than you expect. If these patterns mean something to you, Subscribe so the next discovery doesn't slip past unnoticed. And in the comments, leave the one word your mind keeps circling back to. For me, it's arithmetic. There is evidence of that wariness in how great whites now move along coasts that overlap with orca ranges. They prefer the edges, the shallower margins, the places where a large dolphin might not follow. They time their hunting differently, avoiding the hours when pods are most active. These are not decisions made in a single moment. They are the accumulated choices of generations. It is easy to overstate how much we know about these choices. The 2023 study is direct, but it is also narrow. 2 sharks observed, 1 filmed attack with a handful of documented events spread across years and oceans. The pattern is clear, yet the details remain shadowed. How many great whites learn to avoid orcas without ever seeing one? How much of the behavior is inherited instinct, and how much is lived experience? Those questions are exactly where the science is moving. Researchers are comparing the behavior of great whites in orca-heavy waters with those in areas where orcas rarely appear. They are tracking individual sharks to see who returns and who does not. They are beginning to map the invisible boundaries that the sharks themselves seem to respect, lines that no satellite image can show. The boundaries are real, even if they are not marked. Off the coast of South Africa, where the 2023 events took place, the great whites that remain have grown more cautious. They feed differently, they travel differently, and the seals in turn have noticed. The whole system is a set of adjustments, each one responding to the one before. This is the ecological ripple that the dramatic accounts tend to skip. It is not as cinematic as the upside-down hold or the solo and swift attack, but it is the reason the story matters beyond the moment. When an orca targets a great white, it does not just end one life. It sends a signal through the entire food web, and every creature in that web reads the signal in its own way. The signal is not abstract. It is pressure, and pressure is the engine of change. The great whites that feel it move. The seals that sense their absence relax. The fish that the seals eat face new attention. And the ocean, in response, becomes a slightly different place than it was the day before. What is remarkable is how fast that change can happen. The 2023 observations followed a period when great whites had already been disappearing from certain South African beaches, and the cause was debated for years. Some blamed fishing, some blamed pollution. It was only the direct observation of orca predation that finally connected the dots, showing that the sharks were not being removed by human hands alone. They were being pushed out by a predator they could not match. That realization reshaped how scientists think about the whole system. The great white is not a fixed feature of the coastline. It is a mobile player, one that weighs risk and reward continuously. When the risk of staying outweighs the reward of hunting, it leaves. And its leaving changes the neighborhood for everyone else. There is a humility in this that is worth holding on to. The ocean's most famous predator, the animal that has starred in decades of documentaries and headlines, is itself a prey species, somewhere in the water column of power. It is not the top of the story. It is a middle chapter, and the orca writes the one above it. No single encounter captures that hierarchy better than the 1997 Farallon event. A great white, fully grown and at the height of its powers, hung upside down in the gray Pacific for 15 minutes while its predator decided what to do next. The power imbalance was not subtle. It was displayed openly in front of witnesses who had come to see whales and instead saw the order of the ocean rearranged. The fact that the same pattern reappeared in 2023 on the other side of the planet is the detail that transforms the story from anecdote to law. A single sighting could be dismissed as an anomaly. 2, in different oceans and decades, is a pattern, and a pattern that appears across geography tells you that it is not a coincidence. It is a truth about how these two animals relate. That truth has consequences for how we talk about sharks. The great white is not a mindless killing machine. It is a cautious, intelligent animal that manages risk. Its caution in the presence of orcas is not a failure. It is a survival strategy, and it is the same strategy that has kept the species alive for millions of years. The orca, in turn, is not a monster. It It is a specialist, one that has found an efficient way to extract a specific resource from a difficult prey. The behavior is not cruel, it is economical, and the economy of it is why it has been passed down and repeated. Together, the two animals demonstrate something that is easy to miss in the noise of daily life. Nature is not a single story. It is a stack of stories, each one nested inside the next, and the ones at the top depend on the ones below. The orca's story is built on the great whites. The great white's story is built on the seals. And the seal's story is built on the fish. This is why the disappearance of great whites from a coastline matters more than the loss of a single charismatic species. It is a tear in the stack, and the whole structure shifts around it. The ocean does not respond to a tear by holding still. It responds by moving, and the movement is what scientists are now trying to chart. The charts are still rough. The data is patchy, but the direction is clear. The orca's predation on the great white is not an isolated event. It is a persistent feature of the ocean, one that shapes the behavior of both species and the ecosystems they inhabit. What happens next is still being written. The great whites that learn to avoid orca territory will survive and pass on that wariness. The orcas that perfect the liver extraction will continue to hunt, and their methods will become more refined. The seals will adapt to the changing pressure, and the ocean will keep adjusting, as it always has, in ways that no single observer can fully predict. The water off the Farallon Islands is colder now in memory than it was in fact. The gray light of late fall still falls on that surface, and somewhere beneath it, the pattern continues. A great white moves through the current, reading the water for the vibration it fears. An orca moves too, patient, knowing. The ocean holds them both, in the same quiet way it has held every encounter before theirs, and every one that is still to come. For anyone standing on a boat deck, watching the surface for a sign of movement, the lesson is not about winning or losing, it is about attention. The great white keeps the orca in sight, and in that vigilance, it finds whatever chance it has. The orca keeps the liver in mind, and in that focus, it finds its meal. Both animals are defined by what they choose to watch and what they choose to leave behind.